guys, welcome back to another election edition of Meet Victoria with Caleb Shaw, powered by ThriveFuel Digital Marketing. Before we get going, guys, early voting is February 14th through the 25th, and Election Day is March 1st. I am very proud and humbled to be joined today by U.S. Congressman District 27, Michael Cloud. Thank you so much for making the effort to get in here. I know it wasn't easy.
Well, happy to be here. Of course, we're traveling a lot, trying to cover 14 counties.
Oh, yeah.
700,000 people you represent, but it's just extremely important to continue to educate on what's happening in Washington.
Yes, sir. Well, you've done a good job being out and about and everywhere. But for those that, really quickly, if you wouldn't mind, for those who may not know who you are, maybe they're not from Victoria,
sure.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and what made you ever decide to run to begin with and now to run again.
Yeah, well, I graduated from Oral Roberts University. I actually went into ministry after that. I was working at a local church here doing media, young adult pastor for part of it, but really began to look at what was happening in our country, and of course loved what we were doing, helping people every day, making a difference in the lives of people. But my heart just got pulled to what was happening in our nation. And so for me at the time, that just meant go and volunteer, find a way to make a difference in your community. Ended up doing that, began to volunteer, motivating people to work, ended up becoming county chair of Victoria. And so I served as county chair for 7 years. During that time, we turned our county from blue to red, got a lot of people involved. And then I felt like it was time to step down. I remember reading an article. I was just cleaning out an office, and I wrote an article when I was running for county chair, and I was reading the article, and it listed all the things I wanted to accomplish, and we had accomplished everything but one, and we were working on that. And that was kind of a sign for me, like, it's time to pass it on. I didn't know what was next, and I just assumed more time with the family, keep doing what I was doing and trying to build a business and those kind of things. And then I was asked to run for this post. And of course, the answer right away was, no, that's crazy. That's for other people. I've always loved our country, was raised in a very patriotic family, but not a politically connected one. My parents always voted, but I don't even remember having a yard sign in our yard the whole time growing up.
Yes,
so,
sir.
Just good citizens going to work, trying to do what you can, raised me with an ethic, pro-American ethic and those kind of things. My dad built nuclear attack submarines for part of my growing up. And so always had an appreciation, love for our history, what it meant to be American. But it still seemed like something for someone else. But my wife and I began to pray about it and really just felt like a couple things. One, as county chair, I had talked to people all the time about Benjamin Franklin coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and he was asked, do we have a republic or a monarchy? He said, we have a republic if you can keep it. If you can keep it. I told that story like 1,000 times, and now it was coming back to me. And then I remember talking to my wife about it, and we prayed about it, and there was a scripture in Joshua 1 that we came to. And in Joshua, God's talking to Joshua, and Joshua's taking over leadership now of the country, and God comes to him and says, be strong and courageous. And then a few verses later, he says, be strong and courageous. And by verse 9, so we're barely in the chapter, right? By verse 9, he's saying, haven't I commanded you to be strong and courageous? And so that, along with the quote that we've all heard, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing.
Yes,
those
sir.
were some of the big key things that we were like, okay, if this is something we feel like we're supposed to do, we really don't have a choice. We got to do what we can to make a difference. And so we threw our hat in the ring, very much total grassroots effort. We were outspent 4-1, and anyway, ended up winning and going to Washington, and certainly it's been the honor of a lifetime. Also the battle of a lifetime because of where we are in our nation right now to protect and preserve those liberties that we hold dear.
Yes, sir. So after, winning and now serving a term up there, what was your kind of, what have you learned? I know most people, like I have all these assumptions of this is what I think it's going to be.
Yeah.
How has that been when you got there? Did you go into that with assumptions or were you shocked by anything, or did you kind of go in? How did you approach that?
Well, I didn't really set assumptions because I knew it would be a new thing that we had to tackle, that we had to figure out how to get done what needed to be done and work within that environment. I knew it would be toxic at times. I knew there would be pressures and political pressures. I knew there would be corruption in certain elements of it. So that wasn't a surprise. Finding out how deep and broad and wide and all those kind of things, the corruption, the political schemes that happen, the way that our federal government is set up to really undermine the American people and the American worker, and those kind of things, and how developed those corrupt processes are, has been maybe the thing to learn. I mean, there's just a number of ways where our federal government set up almost like a money laundering scheme against the American people. And we saw this under the Obama administration, for example, where they would set regulations in place knowing that their friendly NGO that also works as a get out the vote effort would sue the federal government, and so they would settle with the federal government. And so you have your tax dollars going to settle this case that was brought against it by their friends, so to speak, that turns into, and we saw this, for example, when we heard the policies about we're going to give over $400,000 to illegal immigrants. That was, if you remember, Biden said, oh no, we're not going to do that. And the next day he's like, well, actually, it turns out we might be doing that.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
But the way they were going to go about that, it wasn't like, hey, here's an idea. We're going to have debate on it in Congress, and we're going to, try to ram it through a partisan Congress. It didn't even go that far. What they were going to do was have these NGO groups work with illegal immigrants to sue the federal government, and then take your tax dollars, usurp the process of it all, and funnel funds that way. And so, it's that kind of thing where it's getting into the nitty gritty of how this happens. And it's of course easy to go on, pick your favorite news outlet, national news outlet, and talk for a few minutes on an issue. And it's important to do that because we got to let people know what's going on. But fixing the issue isn't in a news hit. It's getting into the nitty gritty of how these things done, working through the policy issues, coming up with real solutions. We've been effective at doing that in a number of fronts just in the 3 years we've been there. And so, there's still a lot of work left to do, obviously. And so,
yes, sir. And I noticed, one of the things that you have been very active in has been the border and all the issues there. And before we get into the southern border, I guess, one of the things that bugs me right now is every time I turn on the TV, I see the left right now talking about the sovereignty of the Ukraine border and why borders are so important, and we have to protect the Ukraine border because you can't just let anybody walk across and all this. Yeah. And meanwhile, we live here in South Texas, and I'm like, are you guys really talking about this border in Ukraine when it feels like we've lost control of ours? And I know that's been a fight that you've been in from day one. What is it that Washington is not getting, or why do we feel like we're so far on the defensive and we're watching what, to the average person seems like our borders are just eroding and we're losing control, and we can't seem to secure our own borders? What do we do?
The thing we have to realize is, first of all, a lot of people would like to look at this administration, and out of the best intent, we want to think that, okay, even people we disagree with have the best intentions when it comes to the United States of America. At the federal level, in the national conversation, the difference between the right and the left is different than it was a generation or two ago, where it's like you agree on where you're trying to get. We want the same thing for our families and communities. It's just, what's the role of government in getting there? That's not where we are. We have two diabolically worldviews. You have one that's that America's a force for good in the world, albeit every nation, every person's imperfect, but we've always been on the forefront of being that shining city on the hill for the world, versus a worldview that pushes toward globalism, that is actually working toward what they've called a multipolar view, or worldview, in which case they have to bring the United States down a notch to create this atmosphere where they can restructure the world and toward a globalist ideal. And so we see those things happening right now, and part of that is opening up our border. A big part of that's opening up our border. When we look at what's going on in the Ukraine right now, obviously most Americans, and especially here in Texas, are like, what about the border just a couple hundred miles from my home? What about the things that are going on in my community right now? What about the violence that we see in communities? Fentanyl right now is the #1 killer for people under 65 in our country.
My best friend died of fentanyl.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Well,
yes, sir.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's making its way into schools. It's tragic what's happening right now, and you think of how much investment we've had to address COVID, but yet we have this open sieve at at the border when it comes to what's going on. And then you look at Ukraine, we would have never gotten to the Ukraine if we would have been tough on let's promote American-made energy. Let's not give Russia a pipeline that's going to allow them a stranglehold on these European nations, these NATO nations that would be supporting us in the Ukraine or helping out in that if we had the bully pulpit to stand strong. And then you go to the debacle of Afghanistan where we left $85 billion of first-rate equipment there, not to mention the people we betrayed. And I'll just say we were working on Afghanistan to try to get people out. And the biggest obstacle was not the Taliban. There were times that we had 6 airplanes on the tarmac. I had the identification of everybody, like I'm talking the state phone.
Yes, sir.
The State
Yes,
Department.
sir.
I'm looking at the green cards. I'm looking at the roster. These are American citizens. These are, and the Taliban was ready to let them fly. We had nations ready to receive them, and the State Department was working against the effort to get people out, to get the right people out.
Right.
And so you go from debacle on the energy, the policies in regard to how the Biden administration approaches energy. Then you go to Afghanistan, and that leads us to a weak need stance when it comes to the Ukraine. Nobody respects us on the world stage. They, and then we have this open, the thing we need to be doing on the border. And when I got to Congress, first step was educating other members who are not from Texas on what's actually going on at the border. This isn't some sort of organic migrant surge.
Right.
This is cartel driven. They go out recruiting. They're taking money from people. They are taking advantage of our laws. They are manipulating. They're doing all these things to get drugs through, to get people through, and they're abusing them along the journey. They're subjecting a lot of them to slavery after the fact, after getting here, and totally taking advantage of us. So the first thing was educating everybody on that. I think we're to the point now where most people in Congress who are paying at all attention, and there's some who aren't, but who know what's going on. But then the House flips, Nancy Pelosi comes in charge. We know she's not going to allow a good border security bill on the floor, and so we put together a working group with a few other members who were keyed in on this issue. We got some other expert working groups who've drilled down on some of the issues at the border. And again, winning. To me, I measure fighters on the battles won, not on the sabers rattled, and so us getting down to the nitty gritty to actually figure out how to solve this and not just talk about it. So we came up with a list of solutions. We sent it to the administration. We scheduled an Oval Office meeting. There are no cameras there because it's a working group session. So it's the president, me, 4 or 5 other people sitting there and going over the list of solutions that we had come up with. And the administration, of course, keyed in on the issue, understood. I mean, he was out there first. We got to build the wall, as his campaign long before I got to Congress, or at least a couple of years before. But for us to be able to work with the administration and to bring a number of those policy issues to bear as part of the border solution that we had come up with was certainly one of the joys of being able to work there and represent the American people. So obviously we have Biden administration coming in now, unraveling everything that's going on. They want open borders. They're never going to say that because they know the American people don't want it. So they're intentionally overwhelming and flooding the system so that it collapses on itself. And it's tragic. The latest thing, of course, or maybe not the latest, but one of the most recent things is the court comes in and says you have to remain in Mexico. So the administration, quote, reinstates it. But I was at a meeting with Border Patrol recently and I asked them, so how's that going? And they literally laughed out loud out of reflex. They're like, it's not happening. And so they'll send a couple people back just to be able to have a couple stories so Jen Psaki can, after circling back, can point to a couple issues.
Yes, sir.
But when it comes down to it, it's worse than it's ever been. And they've turned our good men and women who've signed up to secure our border, many of them veterans who signed up for another stints to protect and preserve our nation, have basically turned them into the last mile delivery system for the cartels. It's tragic. We should not be allowing it. And yeah, we need to be concerned about Russia and their designs for the world, but we need to be concerned about our communities more, and to begin to kind of posture toward that end while we're ignoring what's happening in our communities is really tragic.
Yes, sir. So we're running short on time. One of the questions I'd like to ask is one of the criticisms I hear of you is, Congressman Cloud, he votes right, but he's just too nice of a guy. How would you answer that, to those that feel that way?
Well, Reagan was a happy warrior, and I'm for standing on principle. You'll never see me waver the principle. I have one of the strongest voting records. Even my opponents will start the conversation acknowledging, and so I appreciate the endorsement of my voting record for sure. But sometimes people get a couple of Fox News hits, you get a couple of pats on the back, and you think, oh, great, well, what happens after that? And we've again, been a part of the messaging to the nation. It's important to let people know what's going on, but we have to go beyond that, and we got to come up with solutions. So on the border, I've kind of outlined some of the stuff that we've been able to do and be involved in when it comes to pro-life issues, for example. As part of March for Life, that's wonderful. It's great to be a part of it. But beyond that, we dug into the nitty-gritty. We found out that Obama had passed Obamacare under the auspices of, hey, we're not going to allow tax dollars to go fund abortions. Well, in the rulemaking process, they rewrote the rules, and they interpreted the word separate to mean together. So they said, well, you know how the left does. They interpret, well, this used to mean this, but now it means that. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so they literally said, we think that word separate that's in the law means together. And so we worked with the Trump administration right when we hit the ground to get that reversed. And now, of course, the Biden administration is trying to undo it. But we were able to get some progress on it and actually get it instituted to where, it's becoming difficult for them to do that.
And President Trump did endorse your campaign.
And President Trump did endorse our campaign for sure. It's those kind of issues that we've been working on. We've been on the front lines when it comes to our Second Amendment rights, and the NRA and Gun Owners of America are aware that they've endorsed us as well, because we've introduced a bill that would ensure that the Biden administration or any administration cannot use some sort of health emergency or national emergency to secure your guns. They can't come after your firearms under a health
red flag type laws.
Right now we're leading an investigation against ICE because right now the federal government is prohibited from coming up with a national gun registry. So the Biden administration is finding a way to skirt around those laws, and they've collected over the last year an amazing amount of firearm records. Yes, and so we're leading the investigation into what's going on right now with the ATF, I should say. And so we're dealing with that issue as well. We could talk about the First Amendment rights and how we've seen free speech monitored with big tech. Well, we've dealt with a number of investigations into what's going on with how they're being duplicitous and how they represent stuff, but we're also working on legislation, which frankly it's taken a few months, because when you get to the nitty-gritty, and this is the difference between doing the due diligence to actually make sure we actually implement policy versus, we could have real quick put together a messaging bill, threw it out there, got our 2 minutes of fame on an issue, and everybody thought we were doing great work. But we're putting in the months of effort to make sure that this bill is right. But what it will do is it will redefine all the discussions on privacy rights and everything like that. Assume, and I think this is faulty, that the data is big tech's data. And you're kind of asking permission to hold it privately. We want to change the paradigm and say it's your data, you're the one collecting it, or you're the one creating the data. It's your data as a citizen and as a user. There needs to be a whole lot more stipulations, and just by changing the paradigm on that, it totally shifts.
Absolutely.
It totally shifts their monetary
and the
involvement.
And all of that. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
shifts the power and their influence and be able to do things. And so we're on the front lines of all these issues when it comes to being in the trenches.
Yes, sir.
And so I feel very firm about where our record is. We work well with the people in the communities to get things done. And so, there's a difference between, and I'll just say my faith is my guide, and so that keeps me focused, that keeps me driven, that keeps me grounded, along with the people who I've known in this community for 20 and 30 years have permission to speak in my life and those kind of things. But it also keeps me optimistic, and so I'm very well aware of the challenges that are ahead of us, but I believe we're going to win in the long run. And so you know, we're going to keep fighting until it's done.
Roger
And
that.
so there's a lot of work ahead.
Well, I hate to cut you off. We are out of time. I could probably go another hour with you, but thank you for your accessibility. Thank you for making the effort. Again, the first time you did this, this is all you had to do. Well, now you're having to campaign and do the job of the office as well. But your accessibility has always been great, and I appreciate that you don't forget where you came from, and this is still home, and we're proud to have you. Guys, how can they find your campaign? Sorry, I almost forgot.
Yes, campaign is cloudforcongress.com. Of course, come to our website. I'll say, too, that on the official side, it's a completely different mailing list. You have to sign up for both. If you want campaign updates, cloudforcongress.com. But we do send a weekly update on what we're doing in Congress.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and it's just, I consider it the weekly report to the boss, so to speak. You have to go to cloud.house.gov to sign up for that to make sure you're getting the legislative updates.
Because they have to keep those two worlds separate.
Yes, yeah, we keep those worlds separately. If you sign, yes,
sir.
Yeah, to make sure everything's copacetic. So, you know, I'd encourage people to do that.
Roger that. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Guys, early voting February 14th through the 25th, and Election Day is March 1st. Thank you so much to Congressman Cloud for making the time to come in. And guys, we will see you at the next one.